This is lesson 3, qualitative methods and sampling. So again, welcome. In the previous lesson, we introduced qualitative research as an approach that seeks to understand how people experience, interpret, and make meaning of their social worlds. We explored its philosophical foundations and highlighted its emphasis on context and lived experience. Having established what qualitative research is, we now turn to a practical question. How do qualitative researchers actually collect data? Choosing an appropriate method of data collection is one of the most significant and important decisions in any research project. Different qualitative methods generate different types of evidence, and the choice of methods should always be guided by research questions. In this lesson, we'll examine 4 of the most widely used qualitative data methods: interviews, focus group discussions, observations, document analysis. We will also discuss qualitative sampling strategies and consider how researchers decide who should participate in the study. By the end of the lesson, you should be able to describe the major qualitative data collection tools, explain when each method is appropriate, distinguish between different forms of qualitative interviews, understand the principles of qualitative sampling, and justify participant selection within qualitative research. The choice of research method should never be arbitrary. Instead, it should follow directly from the research question. Researchers should ask themselves, what kind of information do I need in order to answer my research question? If the aim is to understand personal experience, interviews may be the most appropriate method. If the aim is to understand collective perceptions or group dynamics, perhaps focus group discussions. If the aim is to understand behavior within its natural setting, observation may be more appropriate. If the research concerns policies, legislation, or organizational processes, document analysis may provide the richest source of evidence. There is therefore no universally best qualitative method. The most appropriate method is one that best answers the research questions. Individual interviews are most commonly used method in qualitative research. They provide researchers with direct access to participants' experiences, perspectives, and beliefs, as well as interpretations. Unlike structured questionnaires, interviews allow participants to explain issues in their own words and often reveal information that researchers had not anticipated. Because interviews encourage participants to elaborate on their responses, they are particularly useful when studying complex social issues such as poverty, migration, unemployment, social exclusion, service delivery, or community development. Semi-structured interviews are also widely used. Semi-structured interviews are guided by an interview schedule containing a series of broad questions related to the research objectives. Every participant is asked essentially the same core questions, ensuring consistency across the interviews. However, the researcher also has the flexibility to ask follow-up questions, seek clarifications, and explore issues that emerge naturally during the conversation. This flexibility is one of the greatest strengths of qualitative interviewing. Participants are able to introduce new ideas, describe unexpected experiences, and provide rich explanations that would be possible using highly structured questionnaires. At the same time, because the interviewer covers similar themes every time and with every participant, the data can later be compared across the interviews during analysis. Semi-structured interviews therefore strike a balance between consistency and flexibility. In-depth or unstructured interviews. Some qualitative studies require even greater flexibility. Narrative inquiry, phenomenology, ethnography, and certain grounded theory studies frequently rely on in-depth or unstructured interviews. So rather than following a predetermined set of questions, researchers identify several broad themes for discussion. The participant is then encouraged to tell a story in their own way. The researcher listens carefully, probes where appropriate, and allows the conversation to develop naturally. Conducting effective in-depth inquiry is a very complex process and requires considerable skill. Researchers must be able to establish trust and rapport, listen actively, recognize opportunities for deep exploration, ask thoughtful probing questions, and gently guide the discussion back to the research topic where necessary. Although in-depth interviews often produce exceptionally rich data, they are also more time-consuming to analyze because each conversation follows its own unique path. Then we have focus group discussions, which differ fundamentally from individual interviews. Common misconception is that focus group discussions are simply a quick way of interviewing people, particularly many people at once. That is not the case. Focus groups are designed to generate a different kind of data. Rather than exploring individual experiences in isolation, focus groups examine how people discuss issues collectively. Researchers are interested not only in what participants say, but also in how they respond to one another. Participants may agree, disagree, challenge one another's assumption, build upon shared experiences, or negotiate different interpretations. These interactions provide valuable insights that individual interviews cannot always capture. For example, a researcher studying community perceptions of municipal service delivery may conduct a separate focus group with young people, older residents, community leaders, as well as municipal officials. Each distinct group is likely to generate different perspectives, while the interactions within each discussion reveal shared experiences, disagreements, and group norms. Facilitating a focus group, again, requires careful planning and skilled facilitation. Researchers should consider questions such as, should participants be grouped according to age or gender? Should you have managers and employees participate together? Migrant and local residents participate in separate discussions? Is the topic sufficiently sensitive that individual interviews would be more appropriate? Power dynamics also require careful management. Some participants naturally dominate discussions while others may remain silent. The researcher's role is to encourage balanced participation while carefully observing how social relationships influence the discussion. Importantly, these interactions are themselves valuable research findings. Who speaks confidently? Who hesitates? Whose opinions are ignored may reveal important information about social power and group dynamics. Observation. Observation enables researchers to study behavior as it occurs within its natural setting. Rather than relying solely on participants' accounts of their behavior, observation allows researchers to witness interactions directly. Observation is particularly valuable when studying community meetings, classroom interactions, workplaces, health clinics, informal markets, public participation processes, and everyday social interactions. For example, a researcher interested in public participation may observe municipal consultation meetings to examine who participates, who remains silent, whose views receive attention, and how decisions are made. Such observations often reveal aspects of social life that our participants themselves may not recognize or articulate during interviews. Types of observations. Observation can either be non-participant or participant observation. In non-participant observation, the researcher remains an external observer, watching events without directly participating. In participating observation, the researcher becomes actively involved in the setting being studied. This approach is common in ethnographic research. So by participating in everyday activities, researchers develop a deeper understanding of local practices, relationships, as well as meanings. Regardless of their approach, careful record keeping is essential. Researchers typically record detailed field notes describing the setting, participants, interactions, behaviors, conversations, reflections, as well as preliminary interpretations. Photographs, audio recordings, and video recordings may also be used to collect where ethically appropriate and with informed consent. We also have document analysis. Not all qualitative research requires the interaction with participants. Many studies rely primarily on documents. Document analysis involves the systematic examination and interpretation of written, visual, and digital materials. These include legislation, white papers, government policies, parliamentary debates, IDPs, integrated development plans, annual reports, NGO reports, court judgments, organizational records, minutes of meetings, letters, diaries, newspaper articles, social media content. Document analysis is particularly valuable in social policy and development because it enables researchers to examine how policies are formulated, implemented, and evaluated over time. Like interviews and observations, documents constitute data that require careful interpretation rather than simple descriptions. Qualitative sampling. Having selected an appropriate method of data collection, researchers must decide who should participate in the study. Unlike quantitative research, qualitative research does not seek statistical represent, represent, representativeness. Instead, researchers deliberately select participants who are able to provide rich, relevant, and meaningful information. This is known as non-probability sampling. The objective is not to ensure that every individual has an equal chance of selection, but rather to identify participants who possess the knowledge, experience, or characteristics required to answer the research question. Purposive sampling. This is the most common sampling strategy in qualitative research. Here, researchers intentionally recruit participants because they meet predefined selection criteria. For example, a study exploring the experiences of social workers implementing child protection legislation may deliberately recruit practicing social workers with direct experience with child protection services. Selection criteria may include characteristics such as age, occupation, gender, geographical location, participation in a program, or professional experience. The researcher must clearly justify why these participants are appropriate for answering the research question. Then you have snowball sampling. Sometimes researchers study populations that are difficult to identify or to access. These include undocumented migrants, former offenders, homeless populations, survivors of trafficking, illicit drug users, individuals engaged in informal economic activities. In these situations, snowball sampling is often appropriate. Researchers begin by identifying one or two participants who met the study criteria. These participants then recommend others who also satisfy the same inclusion criteria. The sample gradually expands through participants' social networks. Snowball sampling is particularly useful when studying hidden or hard-to-reach population. However, researchers must use it carefully. Because participants often recommend people within their social networks, snowball sampling can produce groups of participants with similar backgrounds, experiences, or viewpoints. Researchers should therefore make every effort to recruit participants from diverse networks in order to capture a broad range of perspectives. Sample size in qualitative research. Qualitative studies typically involve much smaller samples than quantitative research studies. This reflects the emphasis on depth rather than breadth. Qualitative researchers spend a considerable amount of time conducting interviews, making observations, and analyzing textual data. As a general rule of thumb, qualitative research often involves between 10 to 15 participants. Although the appropriate sample size always depends on the research question and the methodological approach. Ultimately, however, sample size is guided by data saturation. Data saturation occurs when additional interviews and observations are no longer generating new or substantially new information or insights. For example, if by the 8th or 9th or 10th interview, participants are repeating similar experiencing and no new themes are emerging, the researcher may be approaching saturation. If entirely new themes continue to emerge, additional participants may be required. Researchers should therefore regard numerical guidelines as practical starting points rather than rigid rules. In summary, qualitative research offers a range of methods of understanding social life in depth. Interviews enable researchers to explore individual experiences. Focus group reveal collective perspectives and group dynamics. Observation captures behavior within natural settings. Document analysis provides valuable insights into institutions, policies, and historical processes. Across these methods, participant selection is guided not by statistical representativeness, but by the need to obtain rich, relevant, and meaningful information. For most qualitative studies, a sample of approximately 10 to 15 participants often provides sufficient depth, provided that the researcher reaches data saturation and can adequately answer the research question. In the next module, we turn our attention to quantitative sampling. We examine probability sampling techniques and consider how researchers select samples that allow findings to be generalized to larger populations. Thank you.